The sun dips low over the Las Vegas Strip at 4:22 p.m., spilling gold light across the glass towers of the Elysium Grand Casino. Just a few miles away, private jets glide onto the tarmac one after another, their passengers stepping out in designer suits and diamond watches. People whose combined wealth could buy a country. Inside the casino's private VIP lounge, Lucas Moreno moves among them like he owns the place. Every smile, every handshake, every word is perfectly calculated. He greets each guest by name, remembers their drink, their kids, their last business deal. His tone is warm, his charm effortless. To them, Lucas isn't just a host, he's family. Champagne flows. Keys to penthouse suites are handed out with handwritten notes. Codes to private elevators are whispered discreetly. Everything moves like clockwork, elegant and precise. But behind that polished smile, another plan is unfolding. Within 2 days, 5 of Lucas's trusted VIPs will realize that millions of dollars wired to the casino for gaming credit never reached the vault. The money didn't disappear. It was never meant to arrive. It slipped quietly into offshore accounts controlled by the man now pouring them champagne. By the time the truth surfaces, Lucas Moreno will be 2,500 miles away, sitting in a quiet cafe in Buenos Aires, a glass of Malbec in hand, the mastermind behind one of the boldest heists in Las Vegas history. Before we examine how charm became camouflage and trust became a weapon, take a moment to like this video, share your thoughts in the comments, subscribe to the channel, and hit that hype button to help more viewers discover the unbelievable true stories of crimes that exploit the psychology of wealth. Now let's trace the path of a man who understood that the ultra-rich are most vulnerable when they feel safest. Lucas Moreno was born into the casino world in a way that made his eventual career seem almost inevitable. His mother worked as a cocktail server at a Miami casino for 30 years. His father dealt blackjack at 3 different properties before retiring with chronic back pain and arthritis. Lucas grew up in the margins of the gambling industry, attending schools where half his classmates had parents who worked graveyard shifts, dealing cards or serving drinks to people who measured time in chip stacks rather than hours. He understood from childhood that casinos were ecosystems built on specific rules and hierarchies. There were the guests, who existed in a separate reality where money flowed like water. There were the workers, who made the machine run but remained invisible. And there were the intermediaries, the hosts and concierges and managers who bridged the gap between these worlds, translating the needs of the wealthy into actionable service, while maintaining the illusion that everyone involved was family rather than participants in a commercial transaction. Lucas knew which category he wanted to inhabit. He started at the Elysium Grand as a front desk concierge at 24, fresh from a hospitality management program at UNLV, armed with a degree in fluency in Spanish and Portuguese inherited from his South American grandmother. He was handsome in an approachable way, with dark eyes and an easy smile, the kind of face that suggested trustworthiness and discretion. More importantly, he had the gift of making people feel seen and valued, of remembering details that others forgot, of anticipating needs before they were voiced. Within 2 years, he was promoted to the VIP services department, handling mid-tier high rollers with gambling budgets in the hundreds of thousands. Within 5 years, he was managing the casino's most elite clients, the billionaires and celebrity gamblers, and oil magnates who wagered millions per visit and expected service that bordered on mind-reading. Lucas excelled at this level. He remembered that a particular Saudi prince preferred his suites kept at exactly 68 degrees. He knew which Russian oligarch only drank Beluga vodka from bottles opened in his presence. He understood that a Chinese real estate developer needed weekly calls to his mother arranged through special international lines. These details were his currency, his path to commissions that could exceed $200,000 in a good year. But Lucas also saw the deeper truth that most casino workers never acknowledged. The high rollers were lonely, paranoid, and desperate for connection in ways their wealth couldn't satisfy. They trusted almost no one in their regular lives, but they trusted their casino hosts because those relationships existed in a separate space where normal rules didn't apply. In the casino, they could be themselves, could spend recklessly, could indulge without judgment, because the host made them feel understood rather than exploited. Lucas weaponized this psychology. He became not just a service provider, but a friend, a confidant, someone who listened to personal problems and offered advice on matters far beyond casino services. When a Dubai businessman was going through a divorce, Lucas recommended lawyers. When a Hong Kong investor was launching a new venture, Lucas asked interested questions and celebrated successes. When a Singaporean property developer's son was applying to American universities, Lucas wrote recommendation letters and made introductions. He built relationships that transcended transactional service, and in doing so, he became trusted with increasingly sensitive information and responsibilities. Guests gave him access to their financial information, their travel schedules, their private contact details. They authorized him to make arrangements on their behalf, to handle payments, to coordinate services that required moving substantial amounts of money. But beneath the charm and professionalism, Lucas was drowning. He made $250,000 a year before bonuses, which seemed like extraordinary wealth to most people, but was barely adequate for maintaining the lifestyle expected of elite VIP hosts. He was supposed to dress in designer suits, wear expensive watches, drive luxury cars, live in upscale neighborhoods. The job required him to project success and sophistication because high rollers wanted to feel they were being served by someone who understood their world rather than someone who merely aspired to it. Lucas financed this lifestyle through credit and debt, accumulating obligations that grew faster than his income. He bought a penthouse he couldn't afford, drove a Mercedes he was perpetually behind on payments for, wore Rolex watches purchased on credit cards with interest rates that would horrify financial advisors. He looked successful, which was the point, but the reality was a growing desperation that he hid behind the same practiced smile he showed to guests. The resentment built slowly, a low simmer of anger that occasionally flared into bitter recognition. Lucas watched his clients lose millions on single hands of baccarat without visible emotion, then tip him $5,000 like it was pocket change. He saw money treated as an abstract concept rather than something that could solve real problems, pay real debts, change real lives. The casino itself generated profits that could fund hospitals or schools, but instead it built towers of glass and gold, monuments to the premise that some people had so much wealth they could afford to gamble it away for entertainment. Lucas began thinking about theft not as a moral decision, but as a logical one. The money existed in such abundance that taking some seemed less like stealing and more like redistributing resources that were already being wasted. He rationalized it as evening an imbalance, taking from people who wouldn't miss it to solve problems that were destroying his life. The rationalization was, of course, self-serving and ethically bankrupt, but it allowed Lucas to begin planning without the interference of conscience. Lucas's critical discovery happened during a routine transaction with a Malaysian businessman who wanted to wire $8 million to the casino for an upcoming visit. The guest preferred to have the credit available immediately upon arrival, rather than waiting for processing. So Lucas coordinated with the casino's financial services department to arrange what was called a credit advance. The system was designed for convenience, allowing high rollers to wire money before their visits and have gaming credit ready when they arrived. The process required Lucas to provide the guest with wire transfer instructions, including account numbers and routing information for the casino's receiving bank. Once the transfer was initiated, Lucas would notify the finance department, who would verify the incoming wire and authorize the corresponding casino credit. The system relied on communication between the host and the finance team, with both parties trusting that the information being exchanged was accurate and complete. Lucas noticed something crucial during this transaction. There was a temporal gap between when guests initiated wires and when the finance department verified them. High rollers often wired money days or even weeks before arriving, wanting the administrative details handled early so their actual visits could focus on gaming. During this gap, the money existed in a kind of limbo, sent by the guest but not yet fully integrated into the casino's accounting system. More importantly, Lucas realized that the verification process relied heavily on documentation he provided. When he notified finance that a guest had wired money, he submitted confirmation emails and transfer receipts. The finance team would check their incoming wires against this documentation, matching amounts and reference numbers. But if Lucas provided fake documentation for a wire that was actually going to a different account, and if he timed everything correctly, he could potentially delay discovery long enough to disappear. The scheme would require creating accounts that appeared to be associated with the casino, providing guests with wire instructions that seemed legitimate, and maintaining the deception until the money cleared and he could access it. It would require careful planning, technical execution, and most critically, the willingness to destroy his career and become a fugitive. Lucas spent months considering whether he was capable of crossing that line. He began researching corporate structures and offshore banking, studying how shell companies were formed and how money could be moved across international borders. He learned about cryptocurrency mixers that could obscure the origin of funds, about private banks in South America that didn't cooperate readily with American law enforcement, about countries where extradition treaties had loopholes large enough for a person to disappear through. Lucas formed his first shell company, LM Concierge Services, registering it in Nevada with himself listed as the managing member. He opened a business bank account associated with the company, establishing it as an apparently legitimate entity. He created email addresses and documentation templates that mimicked the Elysium Grand's branding, making materials that would pass casual inspection from guests who trusted him implicitly. Then he formed additional companies in Panama, where corporate privacy laws made ownership information difficult to trace. These companies opened accounts at banks that specialized in serving international businesses, institutions that prioritized confidentiality, and asked minimal questions about the source of deposited funds. Lucas was building the infrastructure for money laundering before he had money to launder, preparing the escape route before committing the crime. The opportunity Lucas had been preparing for arrived in the form of the Elysium Grand's annual Grand Baccarat Invitational, a private tournament for elite players with buy-ins starting at $3 million. The event was prestigious enough to attract serious gamblers from around the world, and Lucas was assigned to coordinate 5 specific VIPs who had confirmed attendance: a Singaporean banking executive, a Dubai real estate developer, a Monte Carlo venture capitalist, a Hong Kong tech entrepreneur, and a Saudi entertainment mogul. Lucas reached out to each guest months before the event, building anticipation and handling logistics. He arranged their private jet charters, coordinated hotel suites, made restaurant reservations, organized entertainment. He also introduced a new element to the conversation, an exclusive promotional offer supposedly funded by the casino's elite loyalty club. VIP guests who wired their buy-ins at least 2 weeks before the event would receive enhanced gaming credit, essentially a bonus on top of their deposits. The promotion was entirely fabricated, but Lucas presented it with such confidence and backed it with such professional documentation that none of his guests questioned it. These were sophisticated business people who made multi-million-dollar decisions regularly, but they were operating in Lucas's domain, trusting him the way they trusted their personal assistants and financial advisors. The wire transfer instructions he provided appeared legitimate, complete with Elysium Grand branding and official-looking account information. What the guests didn't know was that the receiving accounts belonged to Lucas's shell companies rather than the casino. The account numbers were real, the routing information was accurate, but the destination was entirely different from what they believed. When the Singaporean executive wired $5 million, it went to an account in Panama controlled by LM Concierge Services. When the Dubai developer sent $8 million, it landed in a different shell company account in a Nevada bank. Each wire was structured slightly differently, using separate accounts and companies to avoid patterns that might trigger anti-money laundering alerts. Lucas monitored the incoming transfers obsessively, watching as $27 million accumulated across his various accounts. As each wire cleared, he immediately initiated the next phase of his laundering operation, moving money through cryptocurrency exchanges where it was converted to Bitcoin and Ethereum, then run through mixing services that obscured the transaction history, then converted back to various fiat currencies and deposited in private banks in Uruguay and Argentina. The process was technically complex but conceptually simple. Make the money impossible to trace by fragmenting it across dozens of transactions in multiple countries using different financial instruments. By the time law enforcement began investigating, the clear trail would have been shattered into thousands of pieces scattered across the international financial system. Throughout this process, Lucas maintained his normal demeanor at work. He attended meetings, served other clients, participated in planning sessions for the Invitational. To his co-workers and supervisors, he was the same charming professional Lucas they had always known. Nobody detected the stress he was hiding, the constant anxiety that someone would notice an inconsistency or ask a question he couldn't answer convincingly. The week of the Grand Baccarat Invitational arrived with the usual controlled chaos of high-stakes casino events. Lucas's 5 targeted guests checked into their penthouse suites expecting immediate access to gaming credit. Lucas greeted each personally, exuding his characteristic warmth and confidence. When they asked about their credit status, he explained that there were minor processing delays due to enhanced security protocols following recent federal banking regulations. The explanation sounded plausible, and because it came from Lucas, they accepted it without suspicion. He bought time with promises that the issues would be resolved within 24 hours, that the finance department was handling everything, that they shouldn't worry because he was personally overseeing the situation. He arranged complimentary dining and entertainment to keep them occupied while he finalized his escape preparations. On the 3rd night, Lucas worked his shift as normal, moving through the casino floor with practiced ease. He checked on guests, coordinated services, maintained his professional facade. But at 2 in the morning, during a quiet period when the gaming floors had thinned and most staff were focused on closing procedures, Lucas made his exit. He walked through the staff entrance, crossed the parking garage, got into a rental car he had positioned days earlier, and drove away from the Elysium Grand for the last time. By dawn, he was at McCarran International Airport, boarding a commercial flight to Mexico City using his real passport and identity. This was deliberate rather than careless. Lucas knew that attempting to flee using false documents would immediately mark him as a fugitive and trigger heightened security responses. By traveling openly under his own name for the first leg, he appeared to be simply taking a vacation, something employees did regularly. From Mexico City, he would transfer to a connecting flight to Buenos Aires, using documentation that would be much harder for American authorities to trace quickly. The morning after Lucas's departure, his 5 VIP guests began demanding answers about their gaming credit. Casino finance officers checked their systems and found no record of the expected wire transfers. When they contacted the guests to verify transfer details, they discovered that the account information didn't match the casino's legitimate banking information. Someone had provided false wire instructions, and $27 million had disappeared. The casino's security director was notified immediately. Within hours, Lucas's office had been searched, his computer seized, his personnel file reviewed. The evidence of his departure was overwhelming. Cleaned out desk drawers, personal items removed, company phone left behind with the battery removed. His apartment was found similarly emptied, with only furniture remaining. His luxury car was discovered in long-term parking at the airport, with the keys in a magnetic box under the wheel well. By noon, the FBI had been contacted, and federal agents were beginning their investigation. By evening, an arrest warrant had been issued, and Lucas's name had been added to international law enforcement databases. But he had planned for this response, had timed his escape to maximize his head start, had structured his route to make immediate pursuit difficult. The FBI's investigation, designated Operation Mirage Host, quickly revealed the sophisticated nature of Lucas's theft. Forensic accountants traced the shell companies, identified the receiving accounts, and mapped the initial money flows. But the trail fragmented rapidly once the funds entered cryptocurrency systems and offshore banks. The mixing services had done their job, obscuring the transaction paths to the point where definitive tracking became nearly impossible. Agents discovered Lucas's research into money laundering in international flight, finding browser histories and deleted files that revealed months of planning. They interviewed his co-workers, who described him as friendly but increasingly private in the months before the theft. They spoke with former girlfriends who mentioned that he seemed stressed about money despite his apparent success. They built a psychological profile of a man who felt trapped by the expectations of his position and resentful of the wealth he served but couldn't attain. International cooperation requests went out to law enforcement agencies in Mexico, Argentina, Uruguay, Panama, and a dozen other countries. Lucas's photograph was circulated, his financial accounts were flagged, his known associates were interviewed. The casino offered a substantial reward for information leading to his arrest. The 5 victims, furious at being deceived by someone they had trusted, hired private investigators to conduct parallel searches. Within weeks, intelligence suggested Lucas had been spotted in Montevideo, Uruguay. A man matching his description had been seen at a private bank, conducting transactions that involved large cash withdrawals. Uruguayan authorities investigated, but found no definitive evidence of his presence. The financial privacy laws that made Uruguay attractive for hiding money also made it difficult for foreign law enforcement to access records or track individuals. Similar reports emerged from Buenos Aires, Bogota, São Paulo. Lucas seemed to be moving through South America, possibly changing his appearance, certainly using false identification. Some sightings were likely accurate, others probably cases of mistaken identity. The challenge for investigators was determining which leads were real and which were ghosts. The months stretched into years. The intensive manhunt gradually scaled back as other cases demanded resources and attention. Lucas's file remained active, updated periodically when new information emerged, but the realistic expectation of capture diminished. He had successfully disappeared into the vast anonymity of countries where American law enforcement had limited reach and where money could buy privacy and protection from questions. The Elysium Grand faced lawsuits from the 5 victims, who argued that the casino's inadequate oversight had enabled the theft. The litigation was eventually settled confidentially, with the casino likely paying substantial amounts to avoid protracted legal battles and negative publicity. The Gaming Commission launched investigations into VIP hosting practices across Las Vegas, discovering that multiple casinos had similar vulnerabilities in their credit advance systems. Industry-wide reforms were implemented, requiring multiple verification steps for large wire transfers, eliminating individual hosts' ability to provide banking information without oversight, and instituting real-time auditing of VIP credit accounts. The changes closed the specific loophole Lucas had exploited, but they also made the VIP experience less personalized and convenient, frustrating high rollers who valued the efficiency and discretion that had made Las Vegas attractive. Lucas Moreno became a case study in hospitality schools and security training programs, an example of how trust could be weaponized and how the psychology of luxury service created unique vulnerabilities. His name became shorthand for a specific type of fraud, the host job, where charm and access combined with technical sophistication to enable theft on a scale that seemed impossible until it happened. Today, years after the theft, Lucas remains one of the most elusive white-collar fugitives in casino history. He is believed to be living somewhere in South America under an assumed identity, having possibly undergone cosmetic alterations to change his appearance. The $27 million has never been recovered, presumably converted into assets that don't trigger international reporting requirements and dispersed across accounts and investments that would take years to untangle, even if investigators could locate them. The FBI maintains that Lucas will eventually be found, that fugitives always make mistakes, that time favors law enforcement in the long run. But the practical reality is that a person with millions of dollars, no desire to return home, and willingness to live quietly in a foreign country can remain hidden indefinitely. Lucas understood that the key to successful flight wasn't dramatic disguise or elaborate cover stories, but simply disappearing into the background of societies large enough to absorb strangers without question. The story of Lucas Moreno stands as testament to the power of patient planning and exploited trust. He didn't defeat sophisticated security systems or commit elaborate fraud. He simply recognized that high rollers making millions in wire transfers relied on personal relationships rather than institutional verification, and that the gap between trust and confirmation created an opportunity. He spent years building credibility specifically so he could destroy it in a single devastating action, proving that in a world built on wealth and status, the most dangerous person is the one who makes you feel understood.